Welcome back to Agent Confidential. The SEC spring meetings are underway. Everyone is focused on the quotes coming out of Destin. Kirby Smart talking openly about a possible breakaway structure. Athletic directors disagreeing publicly on playoff expansion. Concerns about Olympic sports. Questions about revenue sharing. The future of the college football playoff. The SCORE Act. NIL. Collectives, transfer portal issues. But I think the real story here may be bigger than any individual headline. The economics of college football are now moving faster than the governance structure can realistically contain. And that's why these meetings suddenly feel different. 10 years ago, most of these conversations would have happened quietly behind closed doors. Now, major stakeholders are openly discussing structural separation, governance fractures, and economic realignment in public. That alone tells you how much pressure is building inside the system. Interesting times. One of the most fascinating parts of all of this is that the SEC itself is not perfectly aligned anymore. And honestly, that should not surprise anyone. Different schools have different incentives. If you're consistently competing for national championships, your view of playoff access may be very different than a program trying to create more pathways into the playoff structure. More playoff access means more television inventory, more exposure, more donor engagement, more recruiting leverage, more relevance, and in some cases, frankly, more job security. This doesn't mean that anyone is wrong. It means the incentives are no longer perfectly aligned across the conference. And that's important because for years, the SEC operated with remarkable internal cohesion compared to most of college athletics. But when the money reaches this scale, alignment becomes harder. Now, layer on top of that the broader governance issue. College football today is operating economically like a professional sports enterprise. But structurally, it's still trying to function under a collegiate governance model built for a completely different era. That tension is now impossible to ignore. The television money exploded. The playoff money exploded. Coaching salaries exploded. Facility spending exploded. NIL emerged. Player movement accelerated. Collectives emerged. Private equity conversations entered the sport. Meanwhile, the governance structure remained fragmented, slow moving, and reactive. That's why you're hearing phrases now that would have sounded unthinkable just a decade ago. Breakaway structures, revenue sharing, employment status questions, separate governance models, congressional involvement. Those aren't fringe conversations anymore. They're mainstream discussions happening at the highest levels of the sport. And here's the other thing I think people are beginning to realize. College football is increasingly becoming the economic engine that supports the rest of college athletics. That's where Kirby Smart's comments about protecting other sports becomes very important. Because football now operates at such a massive economic scale that it's naturally beginning to separate structurally from the rest of the model. Not emotionally, economically. And once that happens, governance gets very complicated very quickly. Because now you're trying to balance tradition, Title IX, Olympic sports, television contracts, player compensation, conference policies, donor expectations, competitive balance, and institutional priorities, all at the same time. That's extraordinarily difficult. And honestly, I think what we're seeing in Destin is less about chaos and more about pressure. Pressure and leverage. Stakeholders are beginning to publicly position themselves because they understand the next few years may define the future economic structure of college football. And when people sense structural change coming, they begin protecting their leverage. That's just human nature. Now, through all of this, I still believe something important. College football remains an incredible sport. The passion is still there. The rivalries are still there. The atmospheres are still there. Saturday afternoons in the South still matter. But what happens outside the white lines is becoming increasingly important to the future of the sport itself. That's the real story emerging from these SEC spring meetings. Not simply the headlines, not simply the quotes, but the growing realization that the economics are accelerating faster than the governance structure can adapt. The game is changing. The incentives are changing faster. It's interesting times. We'll continue this for sure.